Hello, I'm Ian and I play with drones, and of course, as many of you know, last week I was up in Iceland, which truly is a drone flyer's paradise. And obviously the main reason for going last week was to film the latest volcanic eruption, but in Iceland there are countless other places to fly and get truly amazing footage, and one of the key things to film up there are waterfalls, because Iceland has got no shortage of them. Big, little, tall, thin, big, fat, or just plain huge, Iceland has got truckloads of waterfalls, and in my opinion, waterfalls always look better from the air. But playing around with the manual settings or using some ND filters like these is a great way to get some very different shots with some nice effects. So one of the most asked questions I get on this channel is, what settings should I use if I'm going to use an ND filter, or when should I use an ND filter and why? So I thought I'd do a very quick video today as to when you do or don't want to play around and make use of them, as they're certainly not essential, but they really do let you have some fun occasionally. And whilst I'm going to be using the Mini 3 Pro here, what I say in this little video is probably applicable to almost any model drone that you've got. So first off, why use them at all? You've already got truckloads of manual settings that you can play around with in manual or pro mode on the Mini 3. And to be honest, auto mode pretty much delivers top-notch results anyway. But by slowing down the shutter speed, you can purposely introduce blurred elements to your picture or video, which can give you some pretty nice effects, especially if you're near fast-moving water. Now, there are truckloads of videos out there on YouTube explaining exactly how NDs work, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but in short, ND filters darken the lens, reducing the amount of light that gets in, which in turn means that you need the shutter to stay open longer in order to get the right amount of light in to take the picture or video. The darker the ND filter, the longer the shutter speed you can use, and taken to the extreme, you can end up with some really long shutter speeds to get some really lovely silky still shots. But in truth, you would only use extremely dark NDs when you're taking still pictures rather than video, and I will explain now in a very quick 2-minute photography lesson. So look, the video and pictures you get from your drone's camera are all completely dependent on exposure, which is the term used to describe the amount of light getting through the lens onto your camera's sensor. And there are 3 things in any camera that affect this. It's known as the exposure triangle, and it is all about the aperture size, the shutter speed, and the ISO. The aperture is literally how big the hole is in the lens that lets the light into the camera sensor. The shutter speed controls the exposure time, which is how long the shutter is open and therefore how much light is going to get into the sensor for each picture or frame of video. And finally, the ISO, which adjusts the sensitivity of the sensor itself. So all 3 elements are directly related and have to be balanced. So when you increase one, you have to decrease the other in order to keep things absolutely balanced. So on a standard DSLR camera, a larger aperture is going to let in a lot more light, meaning you can decrease how long the shutter stays open. Likewise, in low light, you could increase the ISO to increase the sensitivity and avoid the need for a very long shutter speed, which can result in pictures that are just too blurred. But whilst the Mavic 2 Pro, the Autel Evo 2 Pro and the Mavic 3 have got variable apertures, almost every other folding drone out there has got a fixed aperture. So if the aperture is fixed, there are actually 2 sides of the exposure triangle that you can play with, ISO and shutter speed. So whilst ISO affects the sensitivity, it's also very easy to introduce a grainy, mushy effect if you start using an ISO of much above, say, 400. So in truth, you want to try and keep the ISO value down to 100, because that's going to pretty much produce the best results. And for the best cinematic video, there's this general rule of thumb, the 180-degree rule, that you should try and aim for a shutter speed of twice the frame rate. So if you're filming in, say, 25 or 30 frames per second, you want to aim for a shutter speed of around 1/50th to 1/60th of a second. It's a little bit slow, but it introduces this concept of slight motion blur. And of course, if you want really long exposures to get those silky waterfalls, you're going to need to increase the shutter to a very, very long, slow speed. And of course, this is where the problem, because if you've got a fixed aperture and you've pretty much got a fixed ISO because you want to keep it at 100, then you're only left with one remaining side of the triangle to play around with, the shutter speed. How can you change that single value without messing up the exposure? If you change the shutter speed too slow, you're going to let more light in. So how are you balancing this out? And so this is where you make use of ND filters. ND filters are going to manually reduce the amount of light getting into the lens. ND filters are literally a dark piece of glass that reduces the light. That's it. So the idea is that if you have a darker ND filter that reduces the light, you can then play around with the shutter speed. Now, ND filters normally come in sets like this, and they come with numbers. The higher the number, the darker the glass. Each number simply equates to how much light is going to be reduced. So an ND4 only allows through a quarter of the light. An ND16 is only going to allow 1/16 of the light. These strengths of the ND filters, they're normally based on the stops for DSLR cameras, and basically 1 stop would halve the light, 2 stops would quarter the light, which is the same as the ND4. And that's typically why you get ND filter sets spanning ND4, 8, 16 or 32, which simply equates to 2, 3, 4 or 5 stops on a DSLR camera. Anyway, look, enough of the technical stuff. All you really need to remember is the higher the ND value, the darker the filter, the less light comes in, and so the longer, the slower the shutter speed that you can use. And this is where fitting them on the Mini 3 is so easy, because when you fit a filter onto the lens, if you're in auto mode, the Fly app is going to do all the work for you. You do not have to adjust the ISO or anything, it will do it for you. Now, to get them onto your Mini 3, make sure the drone is switched off and turn it upside down and just hold the gimbal and just grab the front and do a click, and literally it will come off. You can see the lens cap. The lens cap that actually comes with it is nothing. It's literally just a frame. There is no glass. Then you'll take your ND filter, match up the longer side with the longer side there, put it on at an angle, and then just do the little click. And there you are, simple as that. So as I said, look, if you're chasing good cinematic video, you want to try and get that shutter speed down to quite slow, around 50th to a 60th of a second. Now, in truth, I don't go mad on this. In my books, anything under 100th of a second is usually going to be more than good enough. The idea is that any fast-moving subject is going to have a little bit of motion blur, as opposed to looking too crisp and too sharp, which can actually make things look a little bit CGI and fake. But you know, keep a bit of reality on this. You're making a nice video, you're not making the next installment of Lord of the Rings or whatever. So just have a play and do what looks right for you. On a bright day like today earlier on, ND8 or an ND16 would have been absolutely fine. You can leave it on all day. But when you want to start getting some special effects with fast moving water, you may want a much higher ND value at 64, or even go full whack with this ND 1000 filter that is actually included with this particular little Freeworld pack. And you can see here back in Iceland the difference that the filters make. Start off with no filter and everything looks fine and dandy, and you may well be happy with that, but when you add an ND32, suddenly things get a lot silkier and a lot smoother. You can see how you get way more white water, and the whole waterfall starts looking whiter and silkier. And if you make use of the slow motion function on the Mini 3, you can get some truly dreamy shots that any professional TV documentary would frankly be proud of, I think. Anyway, look, there you go. That's a quick introduction to ND filters and how you can make good use of them. Before I finish, quick word on PL or polarizers. Polarizers work similar to NDs, but they will also cut down glare and reflections, which can be great if you're filming down over clear blue seas. Polarized filters reduce water reflections, and you can see straight down into the water. But remember, you may not always want that. Sometimes there may be times when the clouds and the reflections are all part of the video. So as ever, you've got to work out and see what works best for you. A cyclist dared to cycle past there. So look, you now know what PL filters do. Like I said, choose them, use them as you see fit. So as ever, give me a little thumbs up, help the video along, hit the bell, get notified when I put a new video out. And wherever you happen to be traveling to this summer and autumn, I hope you get that dream shot that you're after. But either way, until next time, have fun, happy flying.